right here is going to kind of walk everyone through how to set up the Paint app and how a way to create that. There's multiple ways to do it. A few things to point out before I get started. You'll notice in the title of the video, this says that this is a P5 demonstration, a tutorial. You'll notice, however, if you've used that web page before, this is not P5. This is a different online code editor called codepen, but it's also at the moment P5. So I have another video kind of detailing this, but essentially in codepen, up at the top here, you have these three files. These are the same three files that are in P5. But you'll notice in the HTML file right here, this is kind of the short version of that other video I mentioned, we're essentially copied everything that's in the P5 HTML file and put it right here. So since we have this little URL telling us which file to use, we're essentially telling CodePen to use the P5 brain so we can use all of the P5 parts in CodePen. Now the reason I'm doing this is because this is a project in the PDM, the Programming Digital Media course, and as a teacher in this course, you don't want the students finding the video, finding the code, and then doing unscrupulous things in finding, the backup code that's saved publicly on P5. So with the pro accounts on this code editor, you can save things as private, which means that they just can't be found. So by having this up here, it will kind of keep that from being found and potentially stolen and used in ways that you don't want it to be used. So that's all right here. I usually have this video show up after my students finish the project or when we're just about done as kind of a little tutorial, ways to refer to it back to it, but then I'll pull it down right before we start working or hide it just so that way students are able to do their own work. But again, this is essentially P5 just arranged a little differently at this point because we have that HTML file. I have the starting bit of code right here in the JavaScript file. And then if you kind of scroll this bar up, right here is the canvas. So we can see all that right there. And this is where we're going to start creating the Paint app. I have another code up here that is essentially the Paint app. This is the same file that's kind of embedded in the online textbook, again set to private so it can't be just easily found. But the way the Paint app works is that when you click, you have this line that kind of follows your mouse around. That's a specific color. But then if you click on one of these other colored boxes, then the color changes, and so on and so forth right there. And then if you click on the white box, that's the same color as the back. If I hit pink, same color as the background, so that can kind of act like an eraser and erase things. So we are going to be recreating this, specifically a version that uses objects and classes. So you don't need objects and classes in order to do this. However, I feel it's fairly relevant given the course content. So let's get started. All right. So the very first thing we need to do is kind of a simple step. In fact, you'll notice that it is already slightly been done. So, it's by default, the background function in P5 is located inside of draw. But for this project, you'll need to move it inside of setup. Right? And that's going to make it so that way whenever we'll put the background on there first, and then everything that we draw will happen on top of the background. So it will kind of set things up a little bit differently. That's what allows us to create those lines and they don't just disappear. The only other thing you need to do outside of moving that is instead of changing it from the default value, set it to 255 inside of the background. You'll notice what it does here. It essentially makes the whole thing white. All right? And that just makes it so that way we can use the white color ink in order to adjust how, and use it as an eraser, make it match the background, and then just the white is kind of the neutral color for this. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down. Um, and I'm going to make a new function. All right. I'm going to call this function drawing. You don't have to. In fact, you don't even have to do this as a function. This is just how I personally like to do it. It's a way to remind students, hey, you can make custom functions, and you should when it's relevant. Um, so this is going to be what makes the lines appear when we click on everything. So inside of function drawing, what we need to do, we're going to be drawing, this is all a line, right? But what we're going to need is we need a few system variables. So we're going to be drawing from a line in between the points p mouse x and p mouse y to the point mouse x mouse y. Again, just as a refresher on the line function, you give it 4 arguments, and that's 2 coordinates on the canvas. In the case of p mouse x and p mouse y, that's where the mouse was located on the previous frame. And then it's going to draw a line to where the mouse is currently located on the current frame. And that's what lets the line kind of follow the mouse around, because again, these frames are happening very quickly. So it kind of makes that little free form everything. I'm also going to say stroke, if I can type, stroke weight. I'll make this 3, little thicker, right there. And then we'll also say stroke current color. Now this variable doesn't exist yet. We'll make that in just a second. But stroke current color, stroke weight 3, and if you want to be extra safe, what you can do is say outside of all this, say push and pop. And again, this will kind of create a deleted my brace. This will kind of create a localized drawing state, so that way nothing kind of interacts with this accidentally and overwrites that. Right, so I'm going to move my canvas a little out of the way for now. But essentially, we've just made this drawing function here. All right, so before we forget, let's go in and create this current color variable. So I'm going to go up to the top of my code and make a global variable here. Let current color. And we'll just do that. I'm going to go into setup now and say current color. I'm going to assign it a value. This is going to be the default color that will happen no matter what, first when the code loads up. It's going to it can be whatever you want. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to make it black. Just assign it the value 0. Now you may have noticed codepen is kind of saying, hey, you need to save your code, so I'm going to do that. Partly so it doesn't lose any work, partly so it quits bugging me about it. But again, we've just made a variable, assigned it a value right here, and that's it. Now we just have to call our drawing function here. So inside of function draw, I'm going to add a conditional statement and say if mouse is pressed. And then I'm actually going to nest another conditional statement inside of here. All right, so and then I'm going to say if mouse x is greater than, greater than 51, and we're going to go on. What I'm going to do next is then say drawing. I'm going to call that function. The reason I've set this up is because we only want to draw when we click the mouse. Again, it's a click and draw kind of application. And then if mouse X is greater than 51, that's when we want to have it draw. So I'm going to be making a bunch of boxes along the side of the canvas here. And I'm going to make those 50 pixels wide. So I'm saying if we're bigger than 51, that's when we're going to draw. Otherwise, we're not going to do anything. Because when we're less than 51, we'll be clicking to change the color, so we don't want to be drawing when that happens. So that's why I've set this up as a nested conditional statement. So we're only going to call function drawing when the mouse is pressed and then when the mouse X is greater than 51. All right. So let's move on to the next part. And that is making a class. All right, so this class is going to be everything that makes up those little boxes on the side of the screen, the color changers. All right? And in fact, we actually need to make a name for this class. So I'm going to call this color box. You can name it whatever you really want to, but I'm just going to be descriptive and say color box. So now we need a few methods in order to utilize this color box. So constructor. All right. So just as a refresher, the constructor here is essentially where you can compile all of the data that you would need from outside of the class in order to create it. In this case, I'm going to say Y and color. There we are. So then we can go in and say this dot, and then all the parameters. In this case, I'm going to say this dot X equals 0, and I'll get into this in a second. This dot Y equals whatever value we input for Y. This dot width gets assigned 50. This dot height gets assigned 50 as well. And this dot color gets assigned whatever's inside of color when we make the object. So the reason I'm setting it up this way, a lot of times in my classes when I do it, I'll have, X, Y, width, I'll have all of these things as an argument that can be put into making the object. And that's totally a fine way to do this. However, for this project, setting it up the way that we want it to look graphically, the X is always going to be 0 for these. The width and height are always going to be the same. The only things that are changing are the Y position, because it's going to be a vertical row, or the color, because the color is going to change. So those are the only things that we actually need to adjust. All right. So I'm going to go outside of that, and I always call this one up here. You can name it something else if you want, but this is going to be the method that tells our objects to actually show up on the canvas. And you don't need to do this, but I'm going to say push and pop as well. You don't technically need to, but I find that this is helpful. It helps avoid some issues. Again, anything you type in between push and pop kind of gets localized into the draw state. So this way, potentially your objects don't fight with each other when you need to change things. So if a student's being a little more creative in their approach, setting it up this way might help avoid some issues. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to say fill this dot color and rectangle this dot X, this dot Y, this dot width, and this dot height. That'll be it to start with. We'll come back to this in just a second, but that's essentially all of that right there. Let's make some just to move on to the next step. So I'm going to go back up to my line 5 here, and I'm going to make a few of these. So I'm just going to name these the color that it's going to be. So black, red, green, blue. For this video, I'm only going to do these 4 and white. Again, that kind of acts as an eraser. In the demos on, the codes that are online, they have more options, but once you've made a few of these, you get the idea. It's just repeating the same process. So to avoid an unnecessarily long video, I'm gonna just only make a few of them. Right? So now I'm gonna go into setup. I'm gonna say black is assigned a new instance of color box, and we're gonna put that at 0y, and we'll make it black. If you want to utilize RGB values instead of preset string names, you can do that. Here you just got to be sure to put that as an array right here in order for it to fill in properly into this stock color. So you can do it either way. I'm just going to use the preset ones. So red gets assigned new color box. This time we'll say 50 and red. Green gets assigned the value. It's going to be a new color box. It's going to be 100. And it's going to be green. You guessed it. All right. And then we have blue. New color box. 150, comma, blue. And last but not least, we're going to make white another new color box, only this one's going to be at 200, and it's going to be white. You can see now why I'm only doing a few of these, because it gets extremely repetitive. Once it works, you get the idea. You just make more of these things once they all work. All right. So now we've got that. So let's go into our draw function here. I'm going to go after our conditional statement, and we can just say black dot appear. And this should automatically refresh. Why doesn't it dislike me? Oh, I've misspelled some stuff. That's why. Color box. There we are. All right. The coding is all about, running it if it goes wrong, and you got to figure out what the issue is. All right. So black dot appear. We now see the black square. Red dot appear. Green dot appear. Blue dot appear. And white dot appear. Now we have all of our boxes on the side here. They don't do anything yet, they just exist. Which isn't always a bad thing, but for code, we want it to do stuff. So this is a code, not a depressed person on the couch. So we want it to do something. All right. So this is why we're going to go back into our class and make another method. I call this one on mouse pressed. All right. And we're just going to tell it what to do when the mouse gets pressed. All right. And that's what we're going to define right here. Although before we get too far, because I know I'll forget this if I don't do it right now, you'll notice that all of these boxes have an outline. All right? But if you look at all of the demo versions online, none of them actually have an outline. So what we can do is inside of our appear method, we can add a conditional statement and say if, and we'll say this dot color is not equal to white. We say no stroke. Now, our boxes look a little bit different. This is just an extra little step here. So now none of these color boxes have a color, but the white one here does. This way we can keep this aesthetic of no outlines, but we can still see the white outline here. And you need this little outline for the white one, because otherwise you won't be able to see it, and no one using your code will know that it's even there. So that's why you need that. All right, so before I forgot that, let's do that. All right, so now this on mouse pressed, this is going to be a method that's going to describe everything that we want to have happen when we click on our boxes here. So on mouse pressed, so we can say if, this is where we can add in what we want to have happen on there. So if mouse X is less than 50, we're going to do some stuff. And what that stuff is going to be, thinking of another way, we could set this up in a few ways. Let's do it this way. Let's make another function. Actually, no, let's not. We've already made a function. It would basically just be the same thing, the same code in a different spot. So if, so we'll say if mouse X is less than 50, but we also want to say if mouse is pressed. So I just want to move that brace down to here. Come back. And then there we go. All right. So I'm going to save this again so we don't lose any work. So now we're saying, is the mouse pressed and is mouse X less than 50? Because we don't want anything to happen if the mouse isn't pressed. You don't want your color just randomly changing. But then if you remember before, we were checking to see if the mouse is bigger than 51, we want to draw in our code. If the mouse is smaller than 50, that's when we're going to be over here. So we're going to want it to change the color. So if it's there, we're then going to add in a big series of additional conditionals. So we'll say if, only this time we'll be working with mouse Y. All right, so if mouse Y is greater than 0 and mouse Y is less than 50, then we're going to say current color current color, I don't use this code editor as often, it's going to be assigned black. Else if mouse Y is greater than 50 and mouse Y is less than 100, current color is going to be assigned. We have black, then we have red. Else if mouse Y is greater than 100 and less than 150, we will say current color gets assigned green, else if mouse, you can see this is a very repetitive process. Mouse Y is greater than 150 and mouse Y, I forgot to say, and mouse Y, that'll give me an error later. Mouse Y is less than 200. Current color gets assigned blue. And last but not least, else if mouse Y is greater than 200 and mouse Y is less than 250, current color gets assigned white. All right. Let's lower that just a little bit. All right. So now I've got all this stuff, our big series here. So basically, what we're going to be doing is saying for these objects, we're going to run a test. So if mouse is pressed, we'll be doing all these things here. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking I will set this up as a separate function because theoretically, the on mouse pressed, that's going to be it could be done for each of these objects, or we could just set it up for as one. So really, if I just go to my draw function here and just say any of them, black dot on mouse pressed, okay. That's right. All right. The risk of doing these live, your boss runs into the room and says hi really loudly. But that's okay. We're going there. So we're almost there yet. So now, really, we only needed to call on mouse pressed once because the on mouse pressed, the way this is set up, is it's just it's doing all of this math right here. You don't need to tell it to do it for every object. If you were to set this portion, I hate highlighting stuff in this editor. If you were to set all of this stuff right here in a separate function and call that inside of on mouse pressed, then you would need to say, black dot on mouse pressed, red dot on mouse pressed, and so on and so forth for every single one of them. So, but in this case, we should only need it for one. And then function drawing, setting stroke down here. So this should be working now. So I've got this when I click and drag on the canvas, that appears. If I click on the red one, the red appears. Green. Yep, got green, and I'll go in with blue. Yep, that's blue. So now I click on the white. White appears, and that's, again, because it's matching our background, that's acting like an eraser. So we got all that there, and that's essentially it. We've made our class here, so students can then go in and make as many of these as they would want to for their project, and then set it all up. What's important is that whatever color they set their boxes to, it matches whenever you change the variable used to draw the lines. So that's important that they match. And then just being able to check and measure the boundaries of your shapes. Again, I made mine nice and easy with 50 is the size, but they could be something different. You'll just have to adjust these values here. And then you only want it to happen when you click on those boxes. Making the white one be the only one with an outline just so you can see it. Adding push and pop will help keep different things from changing. So like if you don't have those, you could potentially run into an error where whenever you click on a box here, then this outline changes to match whatever's currently being drawn, which is something you just don't want for this project. In the constructor, we can hard code everything except for the Y value and the color because we're only adjusting the Y value. Everything else is the same. And we're changing the color as the only other thing. So those are what we need to change. Since we're using objects and classes, you need to tell those objects to be drawn to the canvas, and then you need to tell them to behave properly when the mouse is pressed on them with that other method. You only want to have the mouse drawn when you're on the canvas, the mouse is pressed, but you're not overlapping with these boxes. Up here in setup, we just made the canvas that can be as big or as small as you need it. We've set the background to white. We've given the current color, which we're using down below to draw the line, a starting value, in this case black. And then this is where we've kind of said, hey, all of these variables that we made up here, except for current color, we're turning them into a color box with this Y value and this color. And that's pretty much it. Again, this kind of has some leeway with everything for the context of each individual classroom, but for the most part, this is the project. So hopefully find this helpful if you need to. Again, I kind of keep this online for most of the year, but take it down while my students are working on this project. So we'll see how this goes. All right. That's it for this one, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.